Hello, everyone. We are live. Good morning or afternoon or whatever time of day it is for you, wherever you are. We're so glad you were able to hop on and join us for our event today, all about conversational AI, current applications and future predictions. For those of you who might be new here, maybe joining us for the first time, my name is Emma Jordan. I'm a marketing manager at staffing and recruiting firm Motion Recruitment, who is the founder and sponsor of our Tech in Motion events, which is our international tech event series. Tech in Motion was founded with the goal to bring together the tech community from all over to share ideas and inspire one another. And we're so excited to now be able to serve you in that way better than ever before. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into today's topic and agenda. I'll go over some housekeeping things for you to know, and then I promise we'll get right into the conversation while you're really all here. So conversational AI has become a focal point of many organizations' digital transformation as remote work and consumer expectations evolve. In this rapidly growing market, we know innovation and optimization continue to be a driving force. Today, we're so excited to discuss this topic in depth with our wonderful panel of industry experts. So you know, today's webinar will be available on demand, so don't worry if you have to skip out for whatever reason. We'll make sure to get you that recording after the session ends. You'll also you'll receive a link in a follow-up email to get that video. Feel free to ask any questions while the discussion is taking place. You should see a Q&A box where you're able to go ahead and ask questions. Also our chat, please engage. We love to hear from you. Our speakers want to hear your questions, and this is your chance to get them answered. So feel free to ask them throughout the discussion, and then if there's anything we don't get to, we'll try to save some time at the end as well. Okay, so I told you I'd keep it quick. Without further delay, I am so thrilled to introduce to you our host for today, Justin Grimmins. He is the founder and CEO of Lab651 and Recursive Awesome, where he specializes in helping his customers succeed by bringing the best software engineering, machine learning, and product development talent to their organization. He's the creator, producer, and host of the Applied AI podcast and YouTube channels, which allows him to interview some of the world's leading experts on artificial intelligence and machine learning. He's the co-founder of the Applied AI Meetup and an adjunct professor teaching graduate level classes on IoT and machine learning at the University of St. Thomas. So you can all see why we chose him as our wonderful moderator today. And finally, he's the co-founder of Captivation, an easy-to-use artificial intelligence platform that uses NLP and computer vision to help presenters improve their skills. Captivation quantifies your improvement as a speaker and offers developmental tips to elevate your game. Welcome, Justin. We're so happy to have you, and I'll let you take it from here.
All right. Thank you, Emma, for that wonderful introduction. I very much appreciate allowing me to be on this panel to moderate these experts here in the field, and also a huge thanks to Tech in Motion for just the vision and the aptitude, I think, to sort of build this organization and this community all around technology. So I'm super excited to be here. So I'm just going to sort of set the stage here before we jump in and get all the panelists going. And as I was sort of thinking about this topic, because there's lots of different ways to sort of slice and dice artificial intelligence. And as we start thinking about the world of conversation, sort of think about all the smart devices that are around us, right? The term conversational AI is sort of emerging as this descriptive term that covers everything from chatbots, text-based conversations, and also things like automated voice response systems, using speech analysis. So look around your home, right? You've got things like Siri, Google, Alexa, all these are devices now that are equipped to handle conversations. Smart TVs, right? Now they can respond to your speech. Navigation, infotainment systems, I guess, inside your car, right? They can all sort of respond to voice. And it's not just consumers. Businesses are using conversational style interactions that sort of take place over, text-based or SMS, or even voice, right? Virtual agents and customer support roles are being able to be responded to even faster than any human possibly could. So, as I think about conversational AI, the other sort of term I wanted to sort of plant in your brain was this conversational user interface. And one of the people that are on the panel today is really going to be talking about design. Actually, two of the members of the panel are from Salesforce, and we're talking about design. And I started thinking a lot sort of around, we talked about text-based interface, right? As computers first started getting going, we were typing on keyboards, right? And then we got into the GUI screens, right? And people started using graphical user interfaces. And in some ways, this is just an evolution of that, right? We're talking about using voice, but I think what's unique is there's got to be a lot of intelligence built in behind this. And I think some of the questions that people had asked that had sent in ahead of time are really going to sort of like touch on sort of how we use natural language processing. How can we use it to analyze what people are saying? Human language can be difficult at times. And it's not just the interface, but it's also, you know, the intelligence and the smarts behind us. And, you know, the industry is really sort of taking note. There's a industry group called Analytics Insights, and I just wanted to quote that. A quote from them: conversational AI has become a focal point. And Emma mentioned it during the beginning when we talk about digital transformations. And the AI market size around conversations was valued in 2020 to be about 5.7 billion. And in 2023, they're focusing it to, or they're forecasting it to be over 32 billion. So that's a 6x improvement, or a 6x growth, I guess, in this space. So it's really, really going to become important for your business, going to be important for your life. And I think it's really going to change the way that we sort of interface through these interfaces, from text to GUI to voice to conversations, as all these devices around us get more and more intelligent. So I know we only have about 60 minutes or so here, but with all of that being said today, I'm super happy to be joined by 3 awesome individuals. We have Greg Bennett. He's the Director of Conversation Design at Salesforce. We have Ronald Ashry. He's the founder and technologist, CEO at a company called OpenDialog. And check them out at OpenDialog.AI. And we have Marlinda Galopin. She's a conversation design senior at Salesforce as well. So thank you, Greg, Ronald, and Marlinda for being here today. I think what I'm going to have each of you do, and we'll move through in that order, Greg, Ronald, and then Marlinda, is maybe talk a little bit about your background real quick, and maybe, you know, your company and what you do at there. So Greg, why don't you kick us off here and talk about Salesforce and conversation design.
Sure thing. Thanks for having us, Justin. I lead the conversation design team and practice at Salesforce. I founded the practice a couple of years ago after having previously worked in the conversational space at Salesforce as a researcher. And as our customer base and the needs of our stakeholders grew in both text and voice-based conversational systems, so grew the need for conversation design, and really a vision for how we conceptualize conversation as an interaction format, and how that's different than your sort of traditional your traditional relational database product development, as well as your traditional graphical user interface product development. And so Marlinda's on my team. We are part of a larger team that essentially sets the vision for how Salesforce can conceptualize conversation both as an output mechanism where we communicate and build relationships with users and Salesforce, as well as an input mechanism. How do users communicate to Salesforce? How do we make sure that those users don't have to change their communicative style? So for example, if they have a different conversational style or different variation of English, how do we make sure that that's represented in our model structure so that way they can speak or type normally to Salesforce and not have sort of anxiety about whether or not it's going to understand them. So that's generally what our charter is as a team. Salesforce is a multinational company that operates in markets across the world, providing customer relationship database management. And now we are evolving that experience to include a conversational interface through which you can interact with that database.
Phenomenal. Really cool. Really, really cool. Thanks, Greg, for giving us a little bit of background. Ronald, do you want to go next?
Sure. And hi, everyone. Looking forward to this. So my background is in product and technology. I started out as an academic doing artificial intelligence back when artificial intelligence was not popular. And I remember very clearly thinking, how can we describe artificial intelligence in research grants without mentioning the words artificial intelligence? It was a different world. Then I moved into industry and consultancy, and in 2017, I was really excited by the the state of natural language processing technologies and what they enabled us to do. So we started a company with the idea of providing consultancy, helping organizations figure out how to take advantage of these technologies. It felt like an inflection point. And for me, what is really fascinating around conversation, and Greg kind of said that same thing, is it flips the dynamic around in how you use machines. So instead of us having to understand, what's the interface, where's that menu that we have to click, and what does that button do, and the machine being just waiting for us to give it instructions to do something, we can use an interface that we are familiar with, which is conversation, and the machine has to understand us. So that's a really interesting change in dynamic. Now, in working within the consultancy and helping organizations, we realized there was lots of very interesting machine learning technology to do a bunch of things. But it took quite a lot of work to get it into a final application and an actual conversation that led to a specific goal. So we started putting a toolkit that really scratched our own itch in terms of, okay, here's the bits that we need in order to finish this conversational application, right, and actually release it. And I started introducing ideas from my AI field, which is something called multi-agent systems, which also deals with the problem of how to handle conversations. And this then led into what is now OpenDialog, which is a platform to help any enterprise to build its own conversational application. So we've kind of pivoted as a company about a year ago. A year and a half ago. The pandemic skewed my understanding of time. And now it's kind of really exciting. The space is growing so quickly, and we are just on the precipice of taking that next step and growing the company as well.
Phenomenal. Awesome. Well, congratulations on getting this company going, and it sounds like a really exciting platform. So yeah, I would definitely say people are going to be checking out OpenDialog.AI. Before I move on, I see a bunch of questions and stuff coming in the chat. That's awesome. As we go, I have a sort of some questions that were submitted ahead of time, so we'll sort of work through those. But in real time, I will be looking through here the chat as well. So if there's things that come up during the conversation, feel free to drop them in here. Not sure if I'll be able to get to all of them during this, but certainly open to having a dialogue more focused around what people want to hear today. So Marlinda, why don't you go next, please?
Yes. Hi, again, thank you for having us. Really happy to be here. I'll skip the Salesforce spiel since Greg already gave that for you. But a little bit about my background. I started my career path in the health sciences, and I was planning to go into nursing. Last minute, I changed direction and ended up in tech, and no regrets. Now I'm helping Greg to grow the conversation design practice at Salesforce. And I currently lead the design strategy and production for the conversational products across the Salesforce's CRM product suite. And I find it to be a really exciting space to be in.
Excellent. Very, very cool. So, I talked about some applications, I think, sort of during the beginning, but, I don't know if you could elaborate, either Greg or Marlinda, I guess, specifically on what sort of challenges are you seeing businesses sort of applying a conversational AI within your organization, or how is Salesforce helping them to really sort of, I guess, bring down the cost, maybe make a better system? I'm just trying to maybe you could elaborate a little bit on some business challenges you're seeing in the field.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the main business challenges I tend to see with folks who are new to trying to implement a conversational solution is really around scoping. So I think a lot of folks kind of tend to approach it as like, oh, conversation's a hot thing and I hear it can help, let's make a conversational bot, without really considering what is the problem we're trying to solve here. Are we trying to reduce, say, the volume of requests that we get at tier 1 level service? Are we trying to provide another method for self-service for users? Are we trying to maybe build a closer relationship between the user and the brand? Each one of those use cases that we're trying to sort of solve against requires a slightly different method of approach, and some of them are more expensive than others. And so I think that before even kind of getting to the resourcing question of like, well, how much is this going to cost and how long is it going to take, it's kind of sort of like putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. I often find myself speaking to stakeholders and customers and saying, okay, well, but like, what's exactly the problem you're trying to solve? Because if you're trying to reduce your overall caseload for tier 1 level agents, so that way tier 1 level agents, for those who aren't aware, are service agents who deal with sort of like the most basic service requests that come in, like I want to reset my password, or I want to check the status of my order, or something like that. If we want to shift those resources to something that's a little bit more of a complicated sort of use case, for example, like maybe we need to troubleshoot an issue for a user and they don't know exactly what's wrong, or something like that, that's something where, okay, we can isolate the tier 1 level issues and determine, okay, are we going to use voice or are we going to use chat? A lot of that's going to depend on where the customers are already interacting with the business. You wouldn't want to shift a customer from a channel to another, and then from there determine, okay, this is how much it's going to cost and this is how long it's going to take. So I find that the biggest challenge there really is, aside from any of the technological stuff, truly it's really about scoping.
Understood. Okay, got it. So you really want to find a very narrow solution you're trying to solve rather than trying to sort of boil the ocean?
Exactly, yes.
Makes sense. So Ronald, kind of same question to you, I guess. You guys are building this platform. You got to be seeing a lot of different use cases and there are a bunch of different businesses sort of coming in and trying to apply this technology. What are some ones that seem very interesting to you and some of the case studies you've done?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things of being a platform, so applicable to all sorts of different verticals, is seeing all these ideas coming in about, and quite often it's, oh, I didn't think we could use conversational AI in this space and so on. So Greg talked about optimization and making existing conversations more efficient and automating in them and offloading that load from service agents. And I think that's definitely the biggest chunk of use cases. The other space that I find that is really interesting is around organizations that are looking at conversational AI and how it can enable new ways of delivering products. So a really interesting project that we're involved right now is actually a clinical trial, and it's looking at cognitive behavior therapy and saying, right, we can have therapists delivering this. Can we automate part of those conversations or all of those conversations? And how much benefit do we get from that automation, and how much benefit obviously does the patient get? And what's really interesting in that space is saying, how can we deploy this in areas that are going through war, for example, where you cannot deploy humans to the scale and order that is required. So this new capabilities that are enabled via the automation of conversations is really exciting. There are perhaps my favorite type of client, although often is also the most complicated, is startups that want to start conversational from the get-go. So they have no baggage, they have no existing technologies, no integration worries, just have a great idea, and they understand how building conversations as part of an overall solution, right? It's not just a magic thing that you sprinkle. As part of an overall solution can completely change how they approach the problem. And they're doing it across, it could be like fintech, insurtech, education, and so on. Just to steal 1 minute on, because education is one of my favorite subjects, right? There is a UN goal that is to provide primary and secondary education to every child in the world by 2030. in order to do that, we would have to double the number of teachers in the world. There's about 59 or 60 million teachers right now. So there's no way that goal can be achieved realistically just by doubling the number of teachers, right? So we have to start thinking, how can we make the teachers that we do have and that we can add more efficient in delivering education to millions and millions of kids? And the only way to do that is via automation and via conversational automation as well. So spaces like that and use cases like that are really, really exciting to me.
Oh, yeah, that is phenomenal. Yeah, if you could basically have your own tutor, I guess, in every home, is kind of like what we're talking about here. That's super, super powerful.
Or enable a tutor to tutor, 3 times the number of kids because you're assisting them in appropriate ways, right?
I see. Yeah. So it's sort of like, the tutors can do the high value stuff, right? You could actually have a lot of these conversational AI stuff doing a lot of the base level, but
exactly
where it really matters, having them focus their time on the high value. Awesome. Very, very good. So, Marlinda, I know your background is really in conversation design, I guess. And one of the questions that I was wondering about, just talk to me a little bit about, how do UX and UI designers, are they going to continue to be responsible for conversation design in the future? Kind of how does it work within your organization as you're sort of building out these interfaces using voice?
Yes, so UI is a different team that works on the tools and the way it looks, but conversation design is really about how it all works together. So I know conversation design as a practice is like growing right now. It's kind of new to people, like what is conversation design? But essentially we are still UX designers, specifically for chat and chatbots, voice and text based. Again, like what I said, it's all about how it works together. And to repeat what Greg said earlier, we think about things such as how do we make sure that the users don't have to change the way that they speak when interacting with a chatbot. Or, for example, I've seen chatbots fail when a user types hello. If you don't think about these experiences, it's the chatbot comes back with the automated, I'm sorry, I'm still learning. Please, talk to this agent or something like that. So simple things like that I think, especially now when people watch movies and see assistants like Jarvis or what other chatbots are there, the expectation is becoming higher now. So you want to be able to create first a set the, what is it? What am I trying to say? Basically, set the expectations up front that this chatbot can only do these specific things, so that way you don't have the frustrations that people come in with. Like, I expected the chatbot to be able to do this and this and this, and it didn't. And it's really important for the conversation designer to come in here because for some reason, people are very unforgiving when a chatbot makes a mistake. In human conversations, we're just like, oh, okay, sure, can you please repeat that, or can you please clarify that? And we're fine with that. But when a chatbot makes a mistake, people take screenshots and share it on the internet, and you don't want that for your brand. So yes, I would definitely say get if you can a conversation designer to help you with this space.
Well, and I want to stick on that just for 1 second, then I'll probably go back. But in fact, somebody was talking about chit chat bots, I guess, in the conversation channel, and I've heard that term before. I mean, what does chit chat mean in this sort of context to you?
So chit chat, at least from my understanding, is let's say, for example, you have a chatbot created specifically for travel use cases, and it helps you do the simple things like tier 1, like what Greg said, like book travel or change my flight. But let's say someone comes in with, and people will do this, tell me a joke. Where are you from? What's your name? Who created you? So you want to still be able to create the responses to these questions, because it's just something that we've seen that people just like to test the chatbot, what can you do? So you want to be able to make sure you include those chit chat intents as well.
Understood. Okay. Yeah, sounds good. You know, the other thing that's sort of coming up here in some of these questions is really around accents. And I'll maybe open that up if I guess anybody could sort of jump in, but how are your, I guess, when you're doing your implementations, how's anyone sort of across the team sort of dealing with those?
So at least on the team that that I manage at Salesforce, accents and dialogue varieties, dialectal varieties, those are something that we take very seriously. Mainly because sort of the way that we would frame it is like, if we were thinking about it as a graphical interface, we consider what it means for the interface to be accessible for someone who, say, is like a blind user, if they're going to use a screen reader. With language, where language is the interface, if the intent model cannot, or the ASR, for example, cannot understand any kind of phonological or syntactic variation that goes on that is representative of a dialect of that language, then all of a sudden we have another access issue. I see it as quite similar to accessibility. I mean, another example would be if someone has an aphasia or if someone has a speech impediment of some kind, that if the model cannot understand those things, then it's as if those users just straight up do not have access to the technology if the language is the means by which we are accessing the technology. A great example would be like if we were creating a voice bot for a health and life sciences company. At that point, then it becomes, okay, your healthcare is impacted by this access issue because it can't understand you. That's a big problem. And so part of what we consider is, one of the things that we do is we make sure to try and hire as diverse as possible of a team of conversation designers who are working on these experiences. Everyone on the team speaks at least one other language in addition to English. For half the team, English is not their first language. To be able to introduce that kind of mindset in terms of what are the kinds of phrases that we're using in the dialogue design? Are we making sure that we are not isolating, but bringing in more users? As well as how are we making sure that we can represent these variants of English, for example, at least we're working on right now, such that our intent models at a local level can understand various dialects and speakers of English. So we've created this project called the Inclusive Intent Training Data Project. And that's something that Marlinda manages. So Marlinda, if you want to talk a little bit more about that, happy to hand the mic over to you.
Sure. Oh, sorry. Yes, I mean, this is a project that we started not too long ago, a couple months ago, and I'm really happy that we've started this initiative. We basically, we designed the experiment where the participant would get prompted to give a certain utterance or a response. And we worked with a third-party vendor who helped collect and bring us the data. That way, we're not overly sampling a certain audience ourselves. And as of right now, we have over 10,000 utterances collected across about 15 intents and 230 research participants. We prioritize 4 dialects: African-American English, Chicano English, Southern English, and English as a second language broadly. And the reason why we picked these 4 to start off with is because they're what we at Salesforce have observed as versions of varieties of English that tend to be historically underrepresented in conversation design or in the conversational AI community at large.
Excellent. Yeah, cool. Ronald, did you have anything around accents you wanted to ask about? Otherwise, I do have some other questions here.
Not specifically on accents. I think Greg and Marlinda covered that fantastically. The other thing that initially I hadn't thought of, but obviously the more you deal with conversational design comes up, is it's not just accents, which is voice, and it's also how people write across different cultures. And the first, as Greg said, the first step is just make sure you have a diverse team, because these issues will come up, and we've seen it ourselves where when there is no other voice, you just do not think of it, and then you have someone there that can actually bring it up. But I live in Italy. OpenDialog as a company is based in the UK, and Italians in more formal business settings talk more formally, right? It's very different from the UK, where it's appropriate to just use everyday language. In Italian, you will change, and then the grammar will support a different way of speaking. So you have to think about that in conversation design and what that conversational flow is like. Yeah, it's a multifaceted challenge.
Yeah. Well, someone had asked it here if anybody has any experience, strengths, or weaknesses kind of using around very large language models, like GPT-3, for example, as sort of a base for chatbot applications. I know that, that sort of hit the market last year. It was very kind of amazing that it could actually do a lot of, I guess, content creation, right? It was doing a lot of just, you sort of pointed off in this direction, it was writing stuff. Are any of you, maybe I don't need to get into details of what you're doing on the back end, and maybe you're completely customizing everything, but just kind of curious if anyone has worked with something like GPT-3.
So that's not something that I have worked with personally, although I'm very familiar with how it works. We work with our own models at Salesforce that are proprietary. But based on how we interact with our models at Salesforce, I'd recommend a similar thing when it comes to GPT-3, in that, like, oftentimes for a global model like GPT-3, you may not have as much creative control over how you're able to train it. And so you'd want to be able to kind of enhance or offset that by training a local model on, like, say, a language variety based on your user base. So let's say, for example, you're a company where the majority of your user base is based out of the southern US states, or the majority of your user base is in, Ontario, Canada, or something like that. You'll want to sample those specific varieties of English, or potentially even French, if we're thinking about Quebec and Canada, and train a local model against that, so that we have something to potentially balance against and make sure that it can at least process that style or variety of English. I think another thing to consider is, like, on the language production side. So when it comes to natural language generation, one thing that I always advise for conversation designers in particular is it's always great to be able to understand or listen to the user and their variety of English. That doesn't necessarily make it okay for us as an institution to use that variety of English with them, because it can come across as culturally appropriative. So, for example, Salesforce, we are a tech company. We're a major tech company that operates in predominantly white spaces. And so it would come across as kind of inauthentic or weird if we were to start producing African-American English in our chatbots toward users, because that's not necessarily an alignment that is overtly associated with Salesforce. A great example I heard of once from a conversation designer by the name of Kent Morita at Google was that he was designing a voice assistant for Google for Japan. And he is a speaker of, like, the sort of Western dialect of Japanese. And the Western dialect of Japanese is sort of historically associated with things like around comedy. Like, comedians are like one of the biggest exports of Osaka, Japan. And so they decided to put an Easter egg and switch from sort of like the Tokyo style, what is often considered standard dialect of Japanese, to Western Japanese to try and be funny in the assistant. And a bunch of users got really pissed off. They were like, how dare you? There's this perception that the company is not from Japan. And even though a person who is a natural speaker of that dialect produced it, it's representative of the overall institution. And so that's a really important thing to keep in mind when we think through NLG. Like, you could train a global model on the variety of English that you're or whatever language you're trying to be able to target for on the listening side. But if it starts to produce that dialect of English, that's going to be something that you're going to have to give the user a little bit more control around, because it could potentially come across as off-putting.
Good insight. Excellent. Well, good. Yeah, no, those are all good things to think about, especially around these sort of just generalized models. I think it's something to maybe think about in the future. Are we gonna have to start building very specific and specialized model? And my mind starts thinking about just artificial general intelligence, sort of the whole sort of AGI question as well. which got me thinking, about like, how can we bring these models and make things to be easy, to have people to be able to create these models easily. And Ronald, when I took a look at OpenDialog, I think one of the things that you guys tout is using no code, right? Sort of a no code system. How have you seen that sort of been received in the industry? I guess, what are some, I guess some problems you're solving, but maybe some issues maybe you've run into trying to build a no code / low code system?
That's a really good question. So it's worth just take a step back and talk about the product thesis of OpenDialog, which talks to exactly where would large language models fit and things like GPT-3 and so on. So the way we see it is what we're trying to enable is conversational applications, virtual assistants, chatbots, and so on, with a purpose, that are trying to help you solve a specific problem within a specific domain. Now, I think in order to usefully tackle that, you need three elements. The first one is you need a conversation designer, right? You need a person that understands that domain, understands the user, and understands what problem is being solved, right? So that's the first element. The second element, you need machine learning, right? You need to do interpretation. You need to understand what is happening. But at the same time, there is a lot of value that can be derived from another field of, or another way of doing artificial intelligence, which is explicit semantic reasoning, right? Where you don't use machine learning to discover the rules that allow you to classify something, but you explicitly represent it. And in businesses, we have such explicit representations, right? So if you're a mobile phone company, and there is a certain way that your different plans work, that is explicit knowledge that you can represent and manipulate. You don't need machine learning or GPT-3 to figure that out for you, right? So what OpenDialog does is connect these three dots. You have the conversation designer, you have machine learning, and then you have semantic reasoning. And it takes a context-first approach. So it tells the conversation designer, right, what's the context within which a conversation is taking place, right? And the example I always use is, if as soon as I walk into a store, I say, give me some help, right? A lot of ML systems do a very good job of telling you, oh, that is the help intent, right? The user is asking for help. It's within the context of they just walked into a store, so I'm going to help them in a certain way. If that same user further down the conversation, as maybe they're paying, say, help me, that's a very different question, right? From an NLP perspective, it's the same words, the same intent, but it's a very different question. Is I'm about to pay, can you help me, please? I'm trying to figure out how to pay. So using the conversation designer to capture and have complete access to the context, and then within a specific context, it's like a hardness on top of your machine learning system, is really, really important. And the other bit for us is, with OpenDialog and the no-code approach, we wanted to break this association between, or lack of association between, as a conversation designer over here, design something in kind of, I don't know, an Excel spreadsheet or Figma or something like that. Here's how the exchange is going to look. And then they hand it over to a developer, throw it over a wall, and the developer has to build conversations, right? We think that the engine that will allow you to run these conversations will influence how you will design them. So those two things need to be together. And that was a big driver for us to say, well, you need a no-code environment so that designers can come in and really interact with the conversation engine to figure out what makes sense. The response to go back to the original question has been very positive, right? Because it addresses this pain of which designers always have. Of I do something over here, I have some ideas, then I hand it over to developers that will reinterpret it or do what's possible within the engine that doesn't fit the ideas and so on. We're just saying, no, your design is the final thing. Like that's what's going to happen. There's no intermediate step.
I just want to add plus 100 to everything that Ron just said, because that is exactly the kind, like you keyed into a very specific piece of, I think, like how I like to help my team at Salesforce conceive of conversation design, is that like you can't just hand your designs off to a developer and be like, okay, I'm done, because there's enough creative control that you're handing over in that transfer where they could potentially change something and you have no idea until it's live, and that by then it's too late. And at the same time, it's also important to kind of think through as you're scoping your design, like you said, like, are we going to use, are we going to intent enable this, or are we not? That's going to scope how you create your designs. Are we going to use a bot builder versus a CLI versus webhooks? I mean, there's so many different ways you could produce a conversational experience. Each one of them will be slightly different and therefore will impact your conversation design. And so that's why, like, the way I've tried to frame it at Salesforce is, rather than siloing these sorts of parts of the process, even the intent training, I've been kind of framing it as full stack conversation design, where it's like from the beginning all the way through training and maintenance, even working with your developer. The only thing that that conversation designer is not doing is writing the code. Everything else, in terms of how we're scoping the training data, how we're doing the information architecture, and having the architectural discussions that constrain the conversation, all of that is exactly what the role encompasses.
Yeah, really sort of focusing around sort of good development process, I guess, right? Whenever you build, if you're going to build a good software system, you really need to make sure that everyone's on the same page, and if one person can sort of get out there and run with it. Conversational AI is kind of no different in that way.
Yeah, and Greg mentioned information architecture, right? That is a big part of it.
Yeah, in what way? With regards to sort of how you're going to pull these pieces together to create one final solution.
Yeah, what are the topics of the conversation, right? What are the and within topics, what are the possible subtopics, and which are the ones that you care about, which are the ones that you want to steer away from? What are the phases of the conversation? You're welcoming the user, you're in the midst of completing a task, you're offboarding them. All that is part of the process of designing something.
Yeah, understood. Have you run into a lot of issues with security, I guess, around maybe these devices, these things always listening? And again, I'm maybe more customers that are implementing your solutions, but you know that I think there's some questions around just the legal aspect of that as well. But I mean, maybe the sort of open question for anybody, but how have you guys been seeing people worried about these conversations going places that they really don't want to have them go?
I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind for us on the Salesforce side is trust is our #1 value at Salesforce. So making sure that all of the data that go into Salesforce through a chat interface, for example, that's something that the customer is aware of how that's being stored, as well as how they can potentially, kind of constrain it. And then also with the caveat of knowing that we on the Salesforce side do not see any of it. So it's part of every customer's service agreement and contract with Salesforce, that their data is completely obscured to the tech and development, research and development side at Salesforce. So it's not like we can go through our customers' data. They would have to enter into a legal agreement to be able to share that with us, and that would require a certain degree of consent from their customers as well. They'll have to make them informed. So that's a big piece of our process that we help to try and ensure that there's transparency around how the data are being collected and how they're used.
Yeah, understood. When there's, I guess my other thinking too was really around bias, as well. You guys are collecting a lot of data locally, probably on old service calls that are coming in. Like how do you deal with some of those questions? Is kind of open again for anybody that wants to jump in and answer that, because there are public open data sets. We've had some questions about that, where you're collecting the data, but a lot of that stuff can have a lot of bias baked into it. What are some ways in which you maybe are looking to tackle those problems?
Happy to jump in. So I think there is a broader question of bias around how you train machine learning models and so on. And without getting into that, just focusing on what you can practically do in kind of everyday conversation design is looking at what are the key points of that conversation where something could go wrong, and make sure that you put the appropriate guardrails around it, right? And help the user understand what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, and what the key decision points are there, so that they can go down an appropriate path and make a good choice, right? One of the use cases that we've worked on is helping people deal with cyber attacks. So the idea of that bot is that you will go to it and describe something quite traumatic that happened to you. You got hacked in some way, and there's all sorts of different things that can happen. And there's a whole bunch of setup questions to help the user understand what they're about to go through in terms of describing this. There is upfront telling the user, don't share any sensitive information. And then there's, once you get the information, passing it through filters to ensure that you remove anything that is potentially identifying. It's not 100% perfect, and you need to put broader guardrails around it. But there is a lot that you can do as you're designing a single application without having to worry about the underlying problems of bias in ML models and so on. Maybe that Justin is frozen. Yeah, I'll fill in for Marlinda. How I'm really interested, and slightly selfishly here, like as you were working on that inclusive intent training project and going out to collect the data from a bunch of different people, like what sort of discussions did you have around that in terms of how you're going to collect the data and potential bias and so on?
Yes, so like I mentioned earlier, we created the exercise, and we were very precise with how we went about creating the rules around the exercise that the third-party vendor would give to the participants. And we said things like, don't worry about grammar, don't worry about spelling. However it is that you would say this utterance naturally, please keep it as is. We leverage what is it, sociolinguistic methods and researchers. I'm not a linguist, as I said, I'm from nursing background, but we have a lot of fantastic linguistic people on the team. And so this is basically what I learned from them. And it was just, Greg has, as an example, I can't do the accent that he does, but for example, if we want to know how a person says orange, right, then we would ask them, what color train do you take? And then that person will come back with, I take, Greg, can you say it? Because I really suck at that.
So see, in Washington, D.C., there's a slight vowel shift around O. So like some people, use the word orange instead of orange. And so it's kind of like playing a big game of taboo, where you don't want to bias them in how they're going to say it, because otherwise they'll just reproduce it back to you. And so you'd have to ask something kind of around that question, like, okay, tell me, how do you get to Vienna? And they'll say, oh, I take the orange line. And I'm like, thank you, got that on tape, ready to go. And I think we take a similar approach with our data collection method in terms of like, okay, so let's say you're trying to do X, Y, and Z. Without, don't change your spelling, don't change how you talk, don't feel nervous about how you're communicating, just speak as naturally as you can. What do you say? so that way we can get as natural as possible the kinds of sort of language variation we would expect across varieties like African American and Chicano English.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I had some internet issues, so it's kind of dropped off a little bit. Somebody had asked a question about analyzing chatbot transcript logs. I'm not sure if you have like separate conversational analytics, to do maybe like further data analysis after you end up. So it's kind of, I guess maybe they're getting more towards like the retraining, right? These things need to continually improve. So like, how are you thinking about, or how are you building those back into any of the systems that you're doing?
So on Einstein bots at Salesforce, you have access to the full transcript of what happened between the bot and the user, as well as additional data regarding how the model is performing. And so the way that we tend to do it on the conversation design side is we start to triangulate against those. First, we look at the session data to see like, okay, were there any kind of unexpected drop-offs? Did anything in the backend time out? And that caused potentially a failure of an intent recognition or a particular dialogue to trigger. If we see those things, then that's when we'll sort of match that timestamp up with the transcript to say, okay, so that's probably what happened there, which means we either need to file a bug or a ticket with our runtime team, or potentially if it's not, a runtime issue, then we need to look at the model and say, okay, is this model balanced? If not, do we need to add more training data to it? If we add more training data to that model, we're going to have to do it to some others too, because we don't want to make it potentially out of balance with the others. And then if everything is okay on the model side, then that's when we dig into the conversation design and see, okay, so did something go wrong? Like we have a feature called conversation repair. And conversation, I think someone had spoken to this a little bit earlier about like repeat questions. Conversation repair is a function that triggers in Einstein bots when a user provides some information that is somehow catastrophically incorrect. And I use incorrect in scare quotes because as a sociolinguist, I don't believe in anything wrong conversation. But like if you provide a phone number with not enough numbers or an email address with no domain, that's really hard for the bot to be able to process because it's formatting against those styles. And so in that situation, that's when the bot would reprompt using conversation repair and say, actually, I need you to use this many numbers or put in the area code, or it needs to be at such and such.com or whatever. And so if there is an issue with conversation repair, then we potentially take a look there, or we look at maybe where the dialogues have been routing. But essentially, that's sort of me painting with a very broad brush. Like those are the troubleshooting steps that we go through when triangulating the log data, the transcript, and the model performance inside the dashboard in Salesforce.
Cool. Ronald, how do you guys handle some of these situations in your platform?
So it's not dissimilar. I think the one thing that's really fascinating to see with OpenDialog is because we tie everything so much to our conversation model and the context and so on. There's different levels of depth you can take. So you can just see that kind of conversation level, or what we call scene level, or turn level, how the different flows within the conversation work. But the things that you look out for is, are my models performing as I would expecting them to? Is what's going wrong there? And then there is a judgment call around, well, is this something that I need to fix at the model level, or is it something that I need to fix with conversation design and so on? And something that thinking of organizations that are looking to bring conversational AI into the organization is realizing that it's not just something that you switch on and things happen. I wish it was like that. It's you're going to design something, you're going to design a new experience. You're going to base it on your previous understanding of how things happened. Your design is going to actually influence how people interact with it and the language that they use. So they're not going to speak to a bot necessarily in the same way that they would have spoken with a human agent. So then you're going to have to review that. And then the really exciting thing that comes through is, because you're collecting data in very specific ways, you can learn a lot, right? And what's really interesting is even in situations where the initial interaction with a chatbot wasn't as positive as you would have liked it to be, and you realize no, there is more training that we need to do and so on. You just learn so much about how users actually want to interact with you as an organization, and then you can feed that back into not just your conversational application but your entire service design and say, oh, they're asking for a new feature, or they're interested in this. Let me just put it on the website, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of organizations, they have this idea, this human in the loop, right? And so are you, I guess, do you guys do that? Are you familiar with companies that will then essentially bring in, you sort of have a probability. It's like, this isn't really behaving the right way. Now we're going to put a bunch of Turks, I guess, for lack of a better term, on this stuff. Have you seen that happening? Are you guys doing that in any of your platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. Handing over to a human or allowing a human to intervene, I think, especially in situations where before it was all humans, is fundamental. Anything that is sensitive, you want to provide that next step. I mentioned cyber attacks, right? So if someone shows up and says, I am in fear of my life, you do not want to continue an automated conversation, right? It's an immediate, right, let me connect you to someone.
Totally. So people can pull that sort of emergency brake, I guess, and sort of get out of the loop.
Exactly. Like, I think emergency brake is a great way of framing it, in that, like, it's always available there if you need it. Like, I also kind of think about it too, like, if we're thinking about from like the service perspective, whenever we work with customer service organizations, one of their big service level agreements is reducing caseload. And so oftentimes service managers or service leaders get really nervous when we expose right away transfer to agent, because they're like, what the heck? The whole point of this is to like try to buffer away from the agents or deflect. And so the sort of conversation design like hack that I kind of thought of at the time, this was earlier on in my conversation design career, but I kind of thought it as like, if you're the user and you're kind of feeling around inside of a dark tunnel, and you can kind of maybe accidentally find the escape hatch, so to speak, where we don't expose a button that says, okay, transfer to agent, but if we do train an intent, where if they at any point say, and I think someone asked about this in the chat, if at any point they do say transfer to agent, an intent will always be ready in the background, where if anything in relation to that comes up, that dialogue will trigger and then transfer the user. So that way there's no necessarily like this need to expose it right away.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. When one of the areas that I saw some questions really was around sort of, I guess, social platforms, right? Things where you're trying to automate responses. And so, there can be things like automatic SMS, but there also just are automatic bots that are just kind of like looking at Twitter, for example, your Twitter feed, and trying to automatically like respond to that. Are there good use cases that you've seen where companies have, I'm guessing Salesforce is applying some of that stuff, as well?
Yes, so we have sort of social media as a channel for Einstein bots, so that way you can deploy to a social media, platform if you want. And that's really how we sort of start to segment it. Just the same as Slack, chat, SMS, all of those are different channels for the bot. We can do the same for Einstein bots. And we also support, what do you call this, social media as an incoming channel for if you want to create cases from that. All of those things can happen within the Service Cloud using Omnichannel.
That's awesome. How do you, I guess, Ronald, one question back to you is like, how would a small business get themselves started in this space, do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I like to talk about how it is possible, right? So very often, especially small businesses, they start hearing terms like machine learning and language models and NLP being thrown around, and they start thinking, well, yeah, okay, this is not for me. I'm not going to go hire people like that, and so on. Now, what's exciting with conversational AI and a lot of the platforms out there, you can get a lot of value with not a lot of training, right? There is standardized things that you can start deploying, and I think a really interesting space in conversational AI is startups focusing on verticals, right? And so you'll start seeing people that do really good conversations all around restaurants or all around appointment booking or any hotel booking and so on, and you can just plug into those things and start using it instead of starting with a blank piece of paper and trying to figure it out.
Great, it's a great point. We're kind of getting near the end here. We only have a couple minutes left. I think what I'd like to ask is maybe we'll go down the line here. We'll have Greg, Ronald, and then Marlinda. Just maybe like, what's the one final thing that you'd like to leave somebody with, right? If we'd sort of boil down our past 60 minutes here, what's the one final thought that you'd want everybody to leave with today as they sort of exit this webinar?
I think probably the thing that I would want to leave with everybody, given what I've seen in the chat, is just getting really specific and tight with your use case and your intents, like being very, very, very clear on what is the solution you're trying to deliver and staying true to that, because I think everything else can kind of fall into place, so to speak. The technological constraints and whatnot, those can be complex, but they become a little bit easier to follow and under your control once you understand what you're working towards. So scope, scope, scope.
Well said. Ronald, you want to take that same question next?
Sure. So two things. We are at the very start of this journey of conversational AI. I think I often say it's like web around 2000, maybe. But the rate of advancement is very fast. And the organizations that plug into this and start moving now are really going to get a much bigger advantage, right? Because automation is, from a scaling perspective, is absolutely fundamental. So if you start now, you'll find yourself in a very different place than if you're trying to catch up, a few years from now. The second thing is, think about how the thing that you're going to build, so that first thing, is going to really add more value than an existing way of doing things. So it's not just enough to say, oh, look, here's a conversation, isn't this neat? It has to add more value. And I think of it in terms of escape velocity, right? So everything that exists right now wants to stay the way it is, and you have to shoot off to the moon and leave the gravity of Earth, right? That's that escape velocity, and finding it for conversational AI in your business is really important.
Awesome. Love the insight. That's great. That's great. Marlinda, you want to end us off here?
Yeah, I'm going to share with you one of my favorite quotes. And so like at the current moment, then it's that if a brand doesn't have a multicultural strategy, the brand doesn't have a growth strategy. So include diverse conversation designers and get that diverse training data. Yeah.
Phenomenal. That's great. That's great. So much. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you again to Emma and Tech in Motion. She's going to come back on here in 1 second to sort of take control over and say a few last words here. So I appreciate everyone here for being on the panel, and I appreciate the opportunity here for me to moderate it today. I thought we had a great conversation. We were talking about AI and NLP and some best practices and some great insights. So thanks again, everyone.
Thanks for moderating, Justin.
Thank all of you for being here today, really, for taking the time to prepare for this conversation and to be here during the event. It's so appreciated. I hope you could tell by all of the engagement and questions that came in. I thought that was so awesome. And just thank you to all of you who attended here today. I'm just going to wrap up with a couple just shout outs. One is you won't want to miss our next event, especially if you enjoyed this wonderful conversation today. Make sure to join us on June 16th for a micro summit where you can learn all about the ever so newsworthy NFTs. We're going to have some great industry experts to share with you their insights so you can just learn more. And it's going to be a great time. So make sure to register for that. And then just follow us on social media so that you can be in the know as we continue to launch and bring you exciting events that you definitely won't want to miss. So we will see you next time. Thank you again to all of our panelists and to Justin for hosting. And we'll see you all soon.